years. Now, since 1989, I've been traveling around the world doing seminars on creation, evolution, and dinosaurs. In tonight's session, we're going to talk about lies in the textbooks. Would you believe the textbooks that we pay to have our kids learn from have things in there that are not true? One of my hobbies for many years has been collecting science textbooks. I have hundreds of them. My wife says I have too many. I say, no, I need a few more, dear. Don't quite have enough. I collect public school textbooks, and I enjoy studying science. And you can ask my kids or my wife, when I get bored, I study science textbooks. I read them. I like studying science. And I think science ought to bring glory to God. But there are some lies in the textbooks that kids are exposed to. And I'm not against science, and I'm not against textbooks. I'm not against schools. I'm not against teachers. I'm against lies. And I think if we took the lies out of the books, they'd be fine. And we're going to share with you some of the things in the textbooks used in your town that are not true, and tell you what you can do about it, how to fix the problem. But you know, it's always amazed me, in my 15 years of teaching science, and now 12 years traveling preaching on creation and evolution, it has always amazed me how two people can look at the same thing and come to opposite conclusions of what they are seeing. Two people can look at Grand Canyon. They're both looking at the same canyon. One of them believes in evolution, so he stands there and says, wow, look what the Colorado River did for millions and millions of years. The Bible-believing Christian stands there, looks at the same canyon, and says, wow, look what the flood did in about 30 minutes. Now, how was that canyon formed, huh? The textbook says, over millions of years, the Colorado River has carved the Grand Canyon from solid rock. Well, now, he didn't see that happen. He doesn't know that it took millions of years. You see, kids, if you're going to succeed in life, you have to learn to distinguish between facts and the interpretation of the facts. Okay? It's a fact Grand Canyon exists. Now, the evolutionists have an interpretation of how it got there, and the creationists have an interpretation. But the fact is, the canyon exists. The interpretation is not part of the fact. The evolutionist says it formed slowly over millions of years. A little bit of water and lots of time. The creationist says, oh no, it took lots of water and a little bit of time. Somebody is wrong, okay? And we're going to show tonight who they are. It is a fact the earth has many layers of sediment. No question. I've been to all 50 states, been to 26 countries, been to the San Andreas Fault, the Hayward Fault, the New Madrid Fault, none of my fault, but I've been there, done that, have the t-shirt, okay? And I taught science for years. I taught earth science. There's no question the earth has layers. The question is, how did they get there? See, the evolutionist says the layers form slowly, and each one represents a different age of millions of years difference in time. The creationist says, oh no, they all formed quickly during the flood. Is there any way to prove which interpretation is correct? Now, the evolutionists in the textbooks are constantly trying to erase the line between the fact column and their interpretation column. And they would like you to believe that their interpretation is also part of the fact. And that just simply is not true. Like this textbook author, he says, the Colorado River has cut through layer upon layer of rock over millions of years. Well, now, hold on a minute. Does he know that, or does he think that? He thinks that. He certainly doesn't know that, does he? It's a fact. If you built a dam across Grand Canyon, a huge lake would form behind it. I mean, a big one. This snow line here kind of tells an interesting story. Between these two red lines is the white stuff called snow. That is indicating the elevation of this Kaibab uplift. See, Grand Canyon is a breach right across a dam called the Kaibab uplift. The elevation between those two red lines averages between 6,900 and 8,500 feet above sea level. Grand Canyon cuts across a ridge, not a mountain. It's like if you took a piece of carpeting and pushed it up into the wall, it would make a wrinkle all the way across the room. That's called a ridge, okay? Kaibab uplift is a ridge. Now, the river enters the canyon at the far right there, and it's 2,800 feet above sea level, and the river flows downhill from there. All known rivers flow downhill. At the middle of the canyon, the river is 1,800 feet above sea level. Now, follow me here now. I was in a debate one time, and this professor got kind of upset. He said, oh, Hovind, you're so stupid. Don't you know it took millions of years to make the Grand Canyon? I said, well, sir, now hold on. We need to study this just a little bit. I've been to Grand Canyon a bunch of times, flown over it a whole bunch of times, studied it, done lots of research on this. Did you know the river enters the canyon at 2,800 feet above sea level and flows downhill to the middle of the canyon? And at the same time, the ground is rising uphill. And it gets about 7,000 or 8,000 feet above sea level. The guy said, yeah. I said, okay, well, sir, Let's ponder a few points here. Did you know the top of Grand Canyon is higher than the bottom? He said, well, yeah. I said, sir, did you know the river only runs through the bottom? He said, yeah. I said, sir, did you know the top is higher than where the river enters the canyon by over 4,000 feet? Rivers don't flow uphill, sir. By the way, there's no delta. Where's the mud that washed out of there? That river did not make that canyon. The flood made Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon is very obviously a breached dam. It is not formed by the Colorado River. In the first place, rivers don't flow uphill. Secondly, if it was flowing uphill, it would have very little erosional power. It just can't possibly be true that the canyon was made slowly over millions of years. It had to be made very rapidly, probably in a couple of weeks or months after the flood when the sediment was still soft. And those sediment layers all formed at the same time. We'll get into that in just a minute. So lie number one that the kids are exposed to in the textbooks, that river did not make that canyon. But Grand Canyon is used as an icon, as evidence that the earth is millions of years old. It always comes up. How old is the earth? Oh, millions of years. Well, how do you know? They'll say, well, take a look at Grand Canyon. And actually, Grand Canyon is proof of a flood. I'll give you another example of how it is possible for two people to look at the same thing and come to opposite conclusions of what they're seeing. Are there any farmers or veterinarians in the crowd that might happen to know what this machine is right here? Who knows what that machine is? Anybody? Yes, sir. What is that? That's a calf puller. That is correct. That's a what? A calf puller. You see, once in a while, a cow has a hard time having that baby calf. And so to get the calf puller out, hook the cable around the calf's legs and jack the calf out of the cow. You get a few tons of pressure on there, calf comes right out, no problem. One day, this farmer was out pulling a calf because it was a breech birth. The back feet were coming out first. So the farmer had the calf puller wrapped around the calf's back legs, and he's trying to pull the calf out, and a city fella stopped his car to see what on earth is going on. And the farmer said, come here, man, I need some help. The city fella said, I don't know nothing about cows. He said, just come give me a hand, would you? He said, okay. So the city fella hopped out of the car, jumped the fence, and ran over to help the farmer pull the calf. He never said a word. He just did what he was told. Well, about 10 minutes later, they're walking up to the barn, going to get washed up. The farmer said, man, I want to thank you for helping me. The city fellow said, oh, I was glad to help, glad to help. The farmer said, have you ever seen anything like this before? The city fellow said, man, I've never seen nothing like this. The farmer said, well, do you have any questions? He said, yes, sir, I got one question. It's been bugging me for 10 minutes. The farmer said, well, what's your question? The city fellow said, how fast do you figure that calf was going when it ran into that cow? No, we're not separating the wreck here, fellas. Two people are looking at the same thing, and one of them is getting the wrong idea of what he's looking at. The Bible warned us that was going to happen. 2 Peter chapter 3 says, knowing this first, there shall come in the last days scoffers. Did you know there are people that scoff at the Bible? I deal with them on a regular basis. I attract them like a magnet. The Bible says the scoffers are going to walk after their own lust. And by the way, the only reason to reject God's word is because of lust, not because of science. There's no scientific reason to reject this book. But some people don't like this book because it chaps their hide. Well, you better get some Vaseline, man. You're going to need it because we will be judged by this book right here. Okay? Anyway, the Bible says the scoffers are going to say, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were. Now that is an important phrase. The scoffers are going to say, the way things are happening now is the way they've always been happening. Long, slow, gradual processes. The Bible says they are willingly ignorant. Willingly ignorant. In the Greek, that means dumb on purpose. The scoffers are willingly ignorant of how God made the heavens and the earth. We cover all that on videotape number 1 and videotape number 2 of what the original creation was like and why they lived to be 900 years old. But the scoffers are ignorant of how the earth was created. They don't understand what it was like in the beginning. And they're ignorant of the flood, it tells us in 2 Peter 3:5. And we cover a lot more on that on video number 6 about the flood, what caused the flood, where did the water go, why did it happen, some of the theories about that. But one of the scoffers in the last days was a fellow named James Hutton. James Hutton lived in the late 1700s, and he wrote a book claiming the earth is much older than most people think. Now you need to understand, folks, in the late 1700s, most people believed the Bible. But there were many countries that were rebelling against the idea of a king telling them what to do. There were many revolutions going on. We had the American Revolution, the Polish Revolution, the French Revolution, the Spanish Revolution. Many countries were throwing off monarchy and establishing a democracy as a form of government. Now, without getting into the, is it good or bad or right or wrong, just the fact is that's what happened, okay? Historically, many countries threw off the king, and the Bible says to honor the king. And so some people thought the Bible stood in the way for their political objectives. Oh boy, if something gets in the way of somebody's political objectives, there ain't no telling what those folks will do, right? So James Hutton came along in the late 1700s and wrote a book and said, I think the earth is millions of years old. Now you realize most folks thought the earth was a few thousand years old back then. So his book wasn't really very well received by most people. But he developed an idea called uniformitarianism. Ooh, big word. That will be on the test, I bet. Uniformitarianism says the present is the key to the past. No, I think the Bible is the only reliable key to the past. But James Hutton's book had a very profound influence on a young lawyer named Sir Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell was a lawyer from Scotland. He hated the Bible. Somebody calculated one time that if all the lawyers in the world were laid end to end around the equator, we would all be better off. But Charles Lyell in 1830 wrote this book right here, Principles of Geology. In this book, Lyell's scoffing kind of oozes off every page. I mean, this guy scoffed at the Bible at every opportunity, as much as a person dared back in 1830, because most people still believe the Bible. But he kept referring to it as ancient doctrines, and he said, if you have real science, you can't believe in religion, they don't mix together. He said, if you believe the Bible, you have a religious prejudice. Just any way to slap at the Bible. He said, men of superior talent, he's talking about himself, who thought for themselves and were not blinded by authority. And kids, you don't have to go through school very far at a secular university, and you will run across at least one professor that has this same scoffing attitude. He scoffed at the Bible. Lyell said his goal was to free science from Moses. He didn't like the Bible telling him what to do. Well, Charles Lyell, in 1830, in this book right here, is one of the primary fellows responsible for developing the geologic column. How many have ever heard of the geologic column before? They divided the earth up into layers, Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic, and all that, and they gave each layer a name and an age and an index fossil. Maybe you saw the movie Jurassic Park, named after the Jurassic layer. All of this was invented out of the clear blue in 1830s. The geologic column is actually the Bible for the evolutionist. It can only be found one place in the world. The only place you can really find it is in the textbook. The geologic column does not exist, folks, and they know that. This textbook says, if there were a column of sediments, unfortunately, no such column exists. See, there is no geologic column. It doesn't exist. Now, it's true the earth has layers. That's not the question. The question is, how did they get there? You see, if the geologic column existed in one location, it would be 100 miles thick. The whole thing is made up from pieces here and there scattered around the world. And we'll show you how it's done in a minute. Lie number 2, the geologic column does not exist. But every earth science textbook used in your town teaches the kids that it does exist and that each of those layers is a different age. Now, it is true the earth has many layers. I don't question that. The question is, how did they get there? How fast was that calf going? Keep that thought in mind. You see, if those layers were really different ages, why are there no erosion marks between the layers? I mean, don't you think if that layer sat there for 10 million years waiting for the next one, there'd be some erosion taking place? By the way, where's all this sediment coming from to go on top of the previous layer? It's got to come from somewhere, How come 70% of the earth is covered by sedimentary rock? Where did it come from? Obviously, got to come from someplace. You see, if you took a jar of dirt, added some water, and shook it up, and set it down, it'll settle into layers automatically. It's called hydrologic sorting. You can do it in a few minutes over your kitchen sink. Those layers are not different ages. Many years ago, I was preaching in a little town in South Dakota called Union Center. Union Center is right there. It's not even on the map. There are 40 people in the whole town. 38 of them came to church. I don't know where the other 2 were, out pulling a calf, I reckon. But man, we had a great meeting. And the preacher said, hey, Brother Hovind, let's go down to Rapid City, South Dakota. They've got a museum there with a bunch of dinosaur bones. I said, all right, man, I like dinosaurs. Let's go. So we all drove down to Rapid City. And we went in this museum, and a guide met us at the door. He said, "Folks, would you like me to give you a tour?" We said, "Sure, that'd be great." The first place we stopped on the tour was the geologic time scale. They've got it lit up behind glass. Boy, they are proud of that thing. And the guide walked over. We gathered around. He said, "Now, folks, this layer of rock right here is about 70 million years old." My daughter was 12 at the time. She raised her hand. She said, "Mister, how do you know how old that rock layer is?" He said, "Well, that's a good question, honey." He said, "We tell the age of the rock layers by what kind of fossils we find in them. They're called index fossils." She said, "Oh, thank you, sir." We walked around the other side, and we're standing over here, and the guide said, "Now, folks, these bones right here are about 100 million years old." My daughter raised her hand again. She said, "Sir, how do you know that layer is 100 million years old?" And he said, "Well, honey, that's a good question. You see, we tell the age of the rock layers by we tell the age of the bones by which rock layers they come from." She said, "Sir, when we were standing on the other side, you told me you knew the age of the layers by the fossils, and now you're telling me you know the age of the fossils by the layers." She said, "Isn't that circular reasoning?" I thought, wow, a chip off the old block. That guide had the strangest look on his face. It was almost as if he were thinking. He looked at my daughter. He looked at me. I wasn't about to help him. I thought, wow, this is going to be good. I got to hear this. He said, "You're right, that is circular reasoning." He said, "I never thought of that before." That poor fellow drove 50 miles one way that night to hear me preach in Union Center, South Dakota. The crowd swelled to 39. We set up a chair in the aisle. Afterwards, he talked to me for nearly an hour. He said, "Mr. Hovind, is everything I believe about geology wrong? I teach this stuff at the school." I said, "Oh, no, sir, I like geology." "Man, you've learned the names of all the minerals." Just that's a good trick. Did you know there are 1,200 different minerals? Some have names about that long. I said, "Oh, I like geology. You've learned the hardness test, the Rockwell test, the scratch test." I said, "Yes, sir, I like all that stuff." But as far as the layers being different ages, yeah, it's all baloney. But he doesn't dare quit teaching it because he'll lose his job. And kids, you might as well learn tonight, to some people in this world, money is more important than truth. And there are teachers all over America that do not believe in the geologic column, they do not believe in evolution, but they keep telling it to the kids anyway because they're afraid they might lose their job. The money is more important to that teacher than the fact that that kid may lose his faith in God's Word. I don't know what you call them here, but where I come from, we call those folks a coward. Look, your job is to do what's right. If you lose your job, well, go get another one then. But do what's right. Don't lie to the kids, okay? It's all based on circular reasoning, though. I'll show you. Here's what the evolutionists themselves are saying. This textbook says, you index fossils will date the rock layers. Notice what it says. Scientists use index fossils to determine the age of rock layers. Clues to Earth's past. They date the rock layers by the index fossils. But then a couple of pages later, they tell the students to date the layers by the index fossils. They date the fossils by the layers on one page and date the layers by the fossils on another page. Circular reasoning. Line number 3. Those layers are not dated by the fossils, and the fossils are not dated by the layers. They all formed at the same time. This fellow says, the intelligent layman has long suspected circular reasoning in the use of rocks to date fossils and fossils to date rocks. The geologist has never bothered to think of a good reply, feeling the explanations are not worth the trouble as long as the work brings results. This man says, it cannot be denied from a strictly philosophical standpoint. Geologists are here arguing in a circle. The succession of organisms has been determined by a study of their remains embedded in the rocks, and the relative ages of the rocks are determined by the remains of organisms that they contain. Encyclopedia Britannica. He can figure it out. It's circular reasoning. Ever since William Smith at the beginning of the 19th century, fossils have been and still are the most accurate method of dating and correlating the rocks in which they occur. Apart from very modern examples, which really are archaeology, I can think of no cases of radioactive decay being used to date fossils. Now kids, if somebody tells you they date the fossils by carbon dating or potassium-argon dating or uranium-235, uranium-238, that is simply not true. Fossils are dated by which layer they come from. The layers are dated by what kind of fossils they contain. Circular reasoning. See, radiometric dating is not even possible if the geologic column had not been erected first. See, radiometric dating didn't come till the 1950s. Geologic column came clear back in 1830. So it is grandfathered in as being true, even though it is a bunch of baloney. This fellow says, paleontologists cannot operate this way. There simply is no way to look at a fossil and say how old it is unless you know the age of the rocks it comes from. And this poses something of a problem. If we date the rocks by their fossils, how can we then turn around and talk about patterns of evolutionary change through time in the fossil record? Niles Eldredge believes in evolution, but he says, look, folks, it's circular reasoning. I like this one. The rocks do date the fossils, but the fossils date the rocks more accurately. Excuse me? Stratigraphy cannot avoid this kind of reasoning if it insists on using only temporal concepts because circularity is inherent in the derivation of timescales. This guy says the charge of circular reasoning can be handled several ways. It can be ignored as not the proper concern of the public. It can be denied by calling down the law of evolution. It can be admitted as a common practice, or it can be avoided by pragmatic reasoning. This guy says, are the authorities maintaining on the one hand that evolution is documented by geology, and on the other that geology is documented by evolution? Isn't this a circular argument? I like the title. Biologists, help. Somebody help me here. Yeah, you need some help. Give up on your dumb geologic column. That's what you ought to do. I like to ask evolutionists this question. I'll say, now fellas, your geologic column contains limestone, several different locations. You have Cambrian limestone, Jurassic limestone, Permian limestone, you know. You got limestone scattered all through here. If I handed you a piece of limestone, how would you know if it's 100 million year old Jurassic limestone or 600 million year old Cambrian limestone? I mean, how would you tell which it is? There's only one way they can tell the age of the limestone. That is by the index fossils. It is always dated by the fossils it contains. That's the way it works. This textbook's used here in Escambia County. Says, trilobite fossils make good index fossils. If a trilobite is found in a rock layer, the rock layer probably formed 500 to 600 million years ago. You think so? Here's a human shoe print where somebody had stepped on and smashed a trilobite. The footprint was so clear you could see the stitching where they sewed the pieces together of the shoe. Now, how could a human with a shoe on step on a trilobite? One fellow said, well, maybe aliens visited the planet 500 million years ago. Oh, yeah. Those aliens will do it every time. Another guy said, maybe there was a large trilobite shaped like a shoe that fell on a small one. Well, there are some big trilobites, but they're not shaped like a shoe. I think 2 Peter has the best explanation for the whole thing. The scoffers are willingly ignorant. You would have to have help to be that dumb. You couldn't do it on your own. You'd have to go to school for years to learn that stuff. By the way, the trilobite has the most complicated eye ever in the world. Now, how did one of the first animals to evolve in the Cambrian explosion have the most complicated eye? Eyeballs are complicated. We'll get into more of that later. Actually, trilobites are not index fossils. There's some indication there are some trilobites still alive in the deep Peruvian trench in the ocean. So they're certainly not an index fossil, that's for sure. This rock has a graptolite embedded in it, a bunch of graptolites. If you took this rock to a geology professor and said, sir, would you please tell me how old this rock is? He would say, oh, this is easy. This contains an actual index fossil. It's called a graptolite. It is the New York State fossil. Until 1993, they were saying these rocks are 410 million years old. But then in 93, they discovered some graptolites are still alive in the South Pacific. Now think about it. If they're still alive, couldn't that mean they lived in any rock layer? Or be found in any rock layer? The textbooks today say the lobe-finned fish, the coelacanth, is an index fossil for rock that is 325 million years old. Excuse me, the coelacanth is still alive, folks. They catch them once in a while in the ocean. There's one on the news today about catching a coelacanth. Lobe-finned fish are not index fossils for anything. They're still around, and they're still just like the bones we find. Kids are told dinosaur bones are index fossils for rock that is 70 million years old. And yet dinosaur blood was found inside the bone. Don't you think it would rot in less than 70 million years? Did you know they broke open 18 million year old shale, and the magnolia leaves inside were still green until they were exposed to oxygen? You think they're going to stay green for 18 million years? I don't think so. The kids are told each of these layers is a different age. And the textbooks have it all real nice, you know. 80 million, 70 million, 60 million, 100 million. Charles Darwin did not like round numbers. He said the Weldian deposits in England were 306,662,400 years old. Of course, he said that back in 1880, so now they'd be 306,662,520 years old. You know, you got to get it exactly right. Those layers are not different ages, folks. Here's a petrified tree standing up, running through a bunch of different rock layers. Now, if you get a petrified tree standing up, running through multiple rock layers, right away you ought to realize, you know, we have a problem here. How can those layers be different ages? Petrified trees that are standing up are found all over the world. I mean, it's very common to find these things. Here's some from Canada showing a petrified tree standing up. Here's one in Alabama. It comes out of a seam of coal, goes through a bunch of rock, and into another seam of coal. And yet each of those seams of coal is supposed to be, you know, different age by hundreds of thousands of years. This 30-foot petrified tree is one of hundreds found in Kettle's coal mines near Cookeville, Tennessee. The top and bottom are in different coal seams dated thousands of years apart. You think the tree stood there for thousands or millions of years and didn't rot? I don't think so. Petrified trees in the vertical position are found all over the world. Those layers cannot be different ages. Kids, don't let somebody in school tell you those layers are different ages. They can't be. We have scientific proof they're not different ages. Okay? When one tree extends through many rock layers, those layers are not different ages. Not by millions of years anyway, maybe by a few weeks or months at the most, before the tree would rot and fall down. Sometimes petrified trees are upside down, running through many rock layers. Now we really have a problem. As far as I can figure it out, the evolutionist has two ways to solve this. He can say the tree stood upright for millions of years while the layers slowly formed around them. Or he can say they grew through hundreds of feet of solid rock looking for sunlight. There's another way to solve this. You could say maybe all those trees were buried in a big flood. How fast was that calf going? Keep that thought in mind. Those geologic column that's taught to the kids does not exist anywhere in the world. It is a lie, and yet the textbooks are full of this stuff about the geologic column, and that simply ought to be removed. Those pages should be cut out of the book, okay? They have nothing to do with science. But in spite of the fact this geologic column does not exist, in the early 1800s, this is the book. And that geologic column teaching is the principle that caused people to reject the Bible. And they began thinking the earth got here by a process called uniformitarianism millions of years ago. And Charles Darwin graduated from Bible college in 1831. The year after this book came out, Darwin was going to be a preacher. As he couldn't find a job, his dad pulled a few strings and got him a job as the naturalist on board the Beagle, and he was going to sail around for 5 years and collect bugs. While he was sailing around, he brought some books with him. He brought his Bible, of course. He just got out of Bible college, and he brought this book by Charles Lyell. And this book, as he read it on that voyage, changed Darwin's life forever. He came back a skeptic, a scoffer. Later, he said in his letters, "Disbelief crept over me very slowly. I felt no distress." He slowly lost his confidence in the Bible. As Darwin sailed around the world, he came to the Galapagos Islands right there, off the coast of Ecuador, South America. There on those islands, Charlie noticed there were 14 different varieties of finches. They're called Darwin's finches today. He studied all the finches and said, you know what? I bet these finches had a common ancestor. I bet you're right, Charlie. It was a bird. And then he said, maybe this proves the birds and the bananas are related. You say, oh, he didn't say that. Well, he sure did. Here's his book right here. On page 170, Charles Darwin said, it is a truly wonderful fact that all animals and all plants throughout all time and space should be related to each other. Isn't he saying the birds and the bananas are related? I sure don't want to put any words in his mouth, but it looks to me like that's what he's saying, folks. See, what Charlie observed is called microevolution. Birds produce a variety of birds, no question. But that doesn't prove birds and bananas are related. So it is a lie to tell the students that all life forms are related. We don't know that. It could be that all life forms have the same designer. It doesn't prove they have a common ancestor. And if a book says it proves they have a common ancestor, cut that page out of your book. That's not science. See, Charlie observed microevolution. Dogs produce dogs, roses produce roses, but they are still the same kind. Microevolution is observable, it is scientific, it is a fact, folks. It happens. You might get a big dog or a little dog, but you always get a dog. And you know, I wouldn't even argue with the idea that possibly the dog, the wolf, and the coyote had a common ancestor. They probably did. But it's the same kind of animal. And a little kid can tell you the difference. I'll show you here. We're going to take a quiz here tonight. Do we have any kids in the room that are 5 or 6 years old? Who's 5? 5-year-old. Okay, what's his name? Jacob. Here we have a dog, a wolf, a coyote, and a banana. Which one is not like the others, Jacob? The banana. All right, let's give him a hand. There we go. They're the same kind of animal, right? See, the Bible said 10 different times in the first chapter, God said the plants and animals will bring forth after his kind. It doesn't say after his species, after his kind. And that's all we've ever observed, folks. See, the word evolution has at least 6 different meanings. You have cosmic evolution, that would be the Big Bang, and then you would have to have chemical evolution. I mean, the chemicals would have to evolve. Then you'd have to have stellar evolution. Did you know nobody's ever seen one star forming? We see lots of them blow up. A nova or a supernova, that happens, but we've never seen one star forming. One professor said, you know, we calculated that if 20 stars explode near each other, it'll produce enough energy to make a new star. Oh, you got to lose 20 to gain 1. You ought to run for Congress. You could help those guys borrow their way out of debt. If you're losing 20 to gain 1, you're not going to get ahead. You don't need to be a genius to figure that out. Plus, even that we've never seen happen. That's all theoretical. Nobody's ever seen one star forming. But there's enough stars out there that everybody on Earth can personally own 2 trillion of them to yourself. There's plenty to go around, folks. But then we'd have to have organic evolution. That's the origin of life. Nobody's ever seen that happen. Nobody has a clue how life can start from non-living material. Every experiment done so far has been a bitter failure for evolution. We'll cover more on that later. Then we'd have macroevolution. That's the origin of major kinds. Nobody's ever seen a dog produce a non-dog. It just has never been observed. Then we have microevolution. Now this one is scientific. See, the first 5 are religious. You have to believe in evolution. It's a religion, and it should not be taught in public schools because it is nothing but a secular religion. That's all it is. Microevolution, we shouldn't even use that word. We should just call it a variation. Then the kids won't be confused into believing that they have evidence for evolution. So you have to start off with the Big Bang, and the first 3 steps, cosmic, chemical, and stellar evolution, would supposedly take billions of years. And then organic evolution supposedly happened, 3 to 4 billion years ago. And then macroevolution happened after that. And today, all we ever observe is actually variations. And they extrapolate that to mean they have evidence for all 6 meanings, and we do not. See, going from micro to macro requires a giant leap of faith and logic. Macroevolution is a fantasy based upon imagination. Now, you're welcome to believe in it. I don't care what you believe in. You can believe in the Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, evolution. I don't care what you believe in. But I resent them using my tax dollars to teach this to the kids like it's part of science. That's where the problem comes in. You can teach your kids anything you want. But if you want to use my tax dollars to teach my kids something that's not science, and put it in a science class, in a science book, we're going to have to discuss that. I'm not going to do that voluntarily anyway. So this macroevolution doesn't happen. But teachers will give students examples of microevolution to try to get them to believe in macroevolution. It's called bait and switch. See, they will give the students one definition of the word evolution and then switch it on them in the middle of the textbook. Watch what this one does. This one says evolution is change over time. That's the first definition they give. Well, who can argue with that? Things change over time, don't they? Sure. Then down here it says, in other words, living things have changed over time. Now they've really narrowed it down, haven't they? What happened to the first 4? They already skipped over everything else, didn't they? They started with living things because they know the first 4 cannot be demonstrated. But they want the kid to assume that it happened. They kind of conveniently skip over that. And then definition number 3, this book says, evolution is defined as a change in species over time. Now they're right down to what we believe. Species change over time, but they're still the same kind of animal. So it is a lie to tell the students that what you mean by evolution is species changing over time. Because what they really mean is everything came from a common ancestor. They're simply lying to the kids. What they'll do, once they get them to believe in evolution by giving them examples of microevolution, they will slip in the other meanings like cosmic evolution and organic evolution. And then they tell the kid, if you don't believe in evolution, you don't understand science. I'm sorry, I think I do understand science, and evolution is not part of it. Evolution is part of a religion. Just because it's mixed in a science book doesn't make it science. Did you know beer is often sold at football games? Beer has nothing to do with sports. And beer does not become athletic by association with sports either. And the fact that somebody mixed in some evolution in this textbook doesn't make the evolution part of science. It waters down the textbook is what it does. There's an awful lot of good science in here. I'm not against the science. I'm just against the poison they mixed in with it, that's all. Evolution isn't part of it. See, what they're doing is a classic case of what is called bait and switch. If I ran an ad in the paper that said, new Mercedes, $10. How many of you would line up to come buy it? Just about everybody, okay. And when you get there, you knock on the door. Mr. Hovind, I'm here to get your Mercedes. I say, well, man, I'm glad you're here, but listen, actually it's $99,000. I switched the price. Well, if I bait you to bring you in with a $10 offer and then switch it to $99,000, that's called bait and switch. That's illegal. Car dealers would go to jail for that, wouldn't they? But that's what the textbooks do every day to the kids. Now, I get some professors, they'll say, you know, macroevolution is just micro over longer periods of time. Well, first place, that's just dreaming. No one has ever seen that happen. No one's ever seen a dog produce a non-dog. You have to imagine that it happened long ago and far away. It is not science. It is religion. By the way, there are genetic barriers that stop this from happening. By the way, who would the partly evolved dog marry anyway? Don't you have to get two of them evolving at the same time, of the opposite sex, in the same place, at the same time in history? They got to find each other and be interested. You got a bunch of problems there, okay? It just doesn't work, folks. Intermediate forms have no way of living in their environment. Variations do happen, nobody argues with that, but they have limits. You know, farmers have been trying to get bigger pigs for a long time, haven't they? Do you think they'll ever get a pig as big as Texas? I bet there's a limit in there somewhere, isn't there? Do you know cockroaches eventually become resistant to pesticides? You guys have cockroaches here in Gulf Breeze, don't you? Yeah. You call them palmetto bugs. Don't lie to me. That's a roach, okay? Do you think they'll ever become resistant to a sledgehammer? I bet there's a limit in there someplace, isn't there? And see, the animals are still producing the same kind of animal. That's not evolution. Dogs producing dogs is not evolution. It's a variation. And the information for that variation was already present in the gene pool. No new genetic information is added. You only selected part of the population to survive. Actually, you lost genetic information. That's not evolution, folks. And the gene pool of the new variety is much more limited than it was before. Somebody spent years crossbreeding dogs to develop a Chihuahua. Imagine that. All that work to make a dog that is 100% useless. Hey, turn all the Chihuahuas loose back into the woods and tell me how long they will last. They'd go up to that wolf. Yep, 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 yep. Crunch. End of gene pool, right? It wouldn't happen. See, genetic information is lost, not added when you get a variety. Now, there's lots of varieties, no question. I come from Illinois, corn country. Did you know there are so many kinds of corn, they have to number them? You'll be driving down the highway and it'll say BX65, you know, don't mix it up with XL29, something will blow up. But I'll tell you what, folks, you can crossbreed your corn from now to the cows come home and you are always going to get corn. You will never get a hamster or a tomato or a whale to grow on your corn stalk, okay? It ain't going to happen. Variations happen. Nobody argues about that. There's hundreds of varieties of dogs, and they might have had a common ancestor. It was a dog, okay? This Irish textbook calls it divergent evolution. Don't give me that. It's still a dog, okay? Giving it a fancy name like divergent evolution doesn't make it part of science. It doesn't change the facts. It is still a dog, okay? The Spanish textbook shows the zebra and the horse probably had a common ancestor. I agree. They probably did. And it looked like a horse. Probably the cows we have in the world came from a common ancestor. I wouldn't argue about that. And it was a cow. But see, what happened in the late 1700s, Hutton came along and took away the idea that the earth is 6,000 years old. And people really began to doubt the Bible. in the early 1800s. And some Christians believed that they had proven the earth was millions of years old. And so in the early 1800s, they began to look for ways to make the Bible say the earth is millions of years old. And that's why they invented the gap theory and the day-age theory and progressive creation and about 6 different compromise positions, all of them unscriptural, unscientific, and unnecessary. The earth is not millions of years old. The Bible was fine. Leave it alone, okay? It's doing fine on its own. But then Charles Lyell came along in 1830 and took away the flood. In people's minds, they no longer associated strata with the flood. And then along came Charles Darwin, and he took away the Creator. And if you want to see what happened to the history of the world after 1850, when evolution became so popular, you know, when we had the rise of communism, socialism, Marxism, Nazism, the New World Order, you better watch videotape number 5, which is very politically incorrect. Or we talk about, never mind, do not watch that one, okay? But it talks about the New World Order and how it's tied into this evolution philosophy. But you know those 3 false teachings, millions of years, uniformitarianism, and evolution, are still in textbooks today? Textbooks used in this town are still teaching that stuff. The Bible warned us in 1 Timothy. Paul said, Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called. Evolution's not science. It's a religion. Adolf Hitler said, let me control the textbooks. I will control the state. Professor Wilson from Harvard University said, as were many persons from Alabama, I was a born-again Christian. When I was 15, I entered the Southern Baptist Church with great fervor and interest in the fundamentalist religion. I left at 17 when I got to the University of Alabama and heard about evolution theory. And now he's up at Harvard destroying the next generation of kids coming through his class, isn't he? All you got to do is go to a secular university for a couple of years and you will run across at least one professor, probably several, and they think it is their duty in life to destroy your faith. Man, are they in trouble when they face God. Did you know 75% of the kids that go from Christian homes to secular schools lose their faith after 1 year of college? What is in these books anyway? This fellow said, fundamentalist parents have no right to indoctrinate their children in their beliefs. We are preparing their children for the year 2000 and life in a global one-world society. And those children will not fit in. Hold on just a minute. Nebraska senator, member of the board, Nebraska Board of Education, said he is preparing my children for something? Excuse me, sir. You just better prepare your children for what you want, but I'll prepare mine for what I want. I want mine to serve God. I don't know what you want for yours. But these books are destroying the faith of kids. Kids love to learn. That's normal. That's good. But what if the information that's in the textbooks that they're learning from is inaccurate? What if it's been proven wrong? What if there are some things in the textbooks that have been proven wrong 100 years ago, but they're still in there? I was in a debate one time, and I went through the evidence I'm sharing with you on this seminar about lies in the textbooks, and I shared 15 or 20 different things that are not true that are still in the books. And the professor got up and he said, now folks, Mr. Hovind is right. These things are not true. However, Mr. Hovind, I've got a question for you. What would you replace them with? I said, folks, what he's trying to not say is, we want the kids to believe in evolution. We have to give them some evidence. He's taken away our evidence, so it's his job to find some replacement evidence. I said, sir, if you don't have any evidence for your theory, I'm sorry. Maybe you should consider getting a new theory. It's not up to me to provide evidence for your theory. I think the theory's dumb to begin with. But if there are some things in the textbooks that have been proven wrong a long time ago, but they still keep them in the books, you have to wonder, is the author ignorant? Or is he deliberately lying to the kids in order to get them to believe a theory? Is there really a bigger plan toward creating a one-world government, and evolution is a vital part of that philosophy? See, our founding fathers said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. See, people that believe they've got rights that come from the Creator, those people don't make good slaves. Eventually, they're going to throw the tea in the harbor, right? But suppose somebody wants a one-world government, a new world order. Ooh, now they've got to get everybody believing there is no Creator. Maybe this evolution is part of a bigger picture. We'll get into that more on video tape number 5. But here's a page showing the kids the evidence for evolution. They're going to say they have evidence from fossils, evidence from structure, evidence from molecular biology, evidence from development. What are they going to show these kids anyway? See, evolution is based on 2 faulty assumptions. Number 1, they will say mutations make something new, and number 2, natural selection makes it survive and take over the population. Neither one of those works. Now, it's true mutations happen. There are mutations in the world, okay? Probably all the roses you've ever seen are mutants from the original rose. Mutations happen, no question. But they do not produce any kind of evolution. All it is the same kind of animal, and no new information is added. This is a mutated bull. He's got 5 legs. He can't run any faster. By the way, no new information was added. Doesn't the bull already have a gene code that tells him it just built one in the wrong place? That's all. That's not new information. That is scrambled information. Here's a short-legged sheep. Look what the textbook says. This mutation would not last in nature. Well, of course not, man. He's the first one the wolf is going to catch. Go, boys, go. Here comes the wolf. Here's a 2-headed turtle. It's a mutant. Not ninja, but he's mutant. See? He's going to freeze first winter. Nobody makes a double-neck turtleneck sweater. I've never seen one. Sure, mutations happen, but it's a scrambling of information that already exists. It doesn't create anything new. It's like taking the letters out of the word Christmas and scrambling them up. You can make all sorts of different words out of those letters, but you can't make Xerox, zebra, or queen. The letters aren't available. And scrambling existing information does not create anything new. Look what this textbook says. Boys and girls, here's a fruit fly. It says normal fruit flies have 2 wings. This mutant has 4. This rare mutation, like most mutations, is harmful. Then it says beneficial mutations are the raw material for natural selection. Well, now that's interesting. They showed us a harmful mutation, but they told the kids beneficial mutations is how it works. Well, why didn't they show us a beneficial one? Would you like to know why? Because nobody's ever seen one. Nobody's ever proven one beneficial mutation. One professor said, "Oh, I know a beneficial mutation." I said, "Really? I'd like to hear about this." He said, "Did you know in Africa, people that get sickle cell anemia cannot get malaria?" Oh. That's like saying, you know, if you cut off your feet, you can't get athlete's foot. Yeah, that's brilliant. That's not a beneficial mutation. Think about it, okay? They don't show the kids a beneficial mutation because nobody's ever seen one. This textbook says we've got evidence from evolution. Evolution and natural selection go together. Now, wait a minute. Next page it says, natural selection causes evolution. And this is the book used in Santa Rosa High School and Escambia High School and Pensacola High School right here, okay? Natural selection causes evolution. No, wait a minute. Natural selection happens, folks, but it doesn't cause any evolution. It's a lie. Natural selection selects the strongest to survive, generally, and it keeps the species strong. It is a conservative process. It is not a creative process. It only keeps the species strong. Creation is thought of at first. It does not give you any new information. See, if you worked in a factory and your job was to check the cars for mistakes, isn't it normal for a factory to have quality control? Your job, when it comes down the line, they get all done building it, you're supposed to kick the tires and slam the doors and, drive it around and see if it works. Suppose your job is to reject all of the cars that don't work right. How long would it take that process to change the car to an airplane? You say, it'll never change it to an airplane. That's my point. Natural selection will not change the species to something else. It'll make sure it stays a good species. It's a conservative process. See, survival of the fittest is true to some extent, but it does not explain arrival of the fittest. It doesn't tell you how it got there. And kids, we're going to learn a big word tonight. Survival of the fittest is called a tautology. A tautology is a sentence that means nothing. You can go home and tell your brother, "Oh, you're speaking in tautologies." In other words, what you said means nothing, right? Here's how it works. You say, "Professor, why did it survive?" He says, "Well, because it's the fittest." "Oh, how do you know it's the fittest?" "Because it survived." "I see. Is that how you tell?" Yeah, it means nothing. And by the way, it's not always survival of the fittest. If a whale goes through a school of fish and eats 80% of them, it's not survival of the fittest. It's called survival of the luckiest. That's what really happens out there. But you know, some folks make these brilliant observations and still come to the wrong conclusions. That's possible to do, you know. Maybe you heard about the scientists that were going to see how far the frog could jump. They put that big old frog down there and said, "Jump, frog, jump." That frog, he took off, he jumped 80 inches. They couldn't believe it. They brought the frog back, cut off one leg. Said, "Jump, frog." He only jumped 70 inches. They brought him back, cut off another leg. Said, "Jump, frog." He only went 60. They brought him back, cut off another leg. Said, "Jump, frog." He only went 50. They brought the frog back, cut off his last leg. Said, "Jump, frog." You know, they expected he'd go about maybe 40 inches based on the data so far. He actually jumped 0. I mean, the frog did not move. They yelled louder, "Jump, frog!" They screamed and hollered. The frog flat didn't move. They were baffled. They tried the experiment again. New frog. Got the same results. So the scientists gathered their data and they said, "You know what, folks? We can conclude that the frog jumps less as the legs were removed." Now that's a good observation. I mean, you got to give them credit, folks. They did observe the data. Okay? They said, "So when we got to no legs, though, something strange happened. We must conclude that a frog with no legs goes deaf." No. See, you had a good observation going, but you got a bad conclusion. Jump, frog, jump. That's what happened with the fruit flies. They took the flies in the laboratory and they nuked them and microwaved them and x-rayed them, and they got those flies to have all sorts of mutant flies. They got a fly with curled wings. He flies around, bzz, 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 can't go anywhere. They got a fly with no wings. What do you call that? A crawl? You can't fly. They raised all these flies, and all they ever got was flies that were worse off than the original fly. One fellow said, "Oh, wait a minute, we got one fly that had wings 4% larger than the average fly. Proof for evolution." Excuse me, it's still a fly. That's not proof for evolution. That's a variation of the same kind of animal. But they got their data together and said, "You know what, folks? The mutations we observed produced flies that were worse off than Grandpa Fly." Good observation. So they said, "You know, fruit flies must have evolved as far as they can go." Oh, bad conclusion. Jump, frog, jump. Maybe you could conclude that God made them right to begin with. Oh, they don't want to give God the credit, that's for sure. Then they do the peppered moth experiment. This is in just about every textbook, and it's sad that it's still in there because it was proven wrong years ago. The whole experiment was a fake. But here's what they tell the kids in the textbook. Boys and girls, they went around and counted the moths on the trees in England and found it was 95% light-colored moths and 5% black. Counting the moths on the trees. Must have been a government project. Then, so the story goes, they burned coal in the factories and the trees turned black, and they counted the moths again, renewed their grant, and found out it was now 95% black moths and 5% light. It turns out, they finally admitted, the guy faked the entire experiment. He glued dead moths to the trees. The picture in your book is of dead moths glued to a tree. That's how it was done for your textbook. The whole thing's a fake. But even if it happened, folks, it didn't prove any evolution. They started with a moth, they ended with a moth. The peppered moth experiment is baloney. Those pages ought to be cut out of the textbook. But they said the moth population was able to shift from mostly white to mostly black when the trees turned black. Sounds good. It wasn't true, but it sounds good. They're going to say, the moth population was able to adapt to the new environment. That sounds good too. Then they're going to say, see, boys and girls, this helps prove we all came from a rock. No, it does not do any such thing. By the way, the moth thing has been proven wrong and admitted to be wrong a long time ago and should be removed from the textbook. But they tell the kids to get a large sheet of black paper, 1 meter square. By the way, I like to kick this dog every time I walk by. Did you know all the new textbooks are metric? Now, I understand the metric system real thoroughly, okay? I'll take a metric quiz against anybody you know. I taught physics for years. But I'm not sure I want a kid coming to help build my house that doesn't know what a 2x4 is. So if you're a patriot, make your paper 39.37 inches square instead. And then get 200 black circles and 200 white circles and put them on the paper. Okay, now boys and girls, we're going to see who can pick up the most in 1 minute. Ready, set, go. Well, of course you're going to pick up the white circles off the black paper. You don't need to be a genius to figure this out. And then they're going to say, boys and girls, see, this helps prove evolution. No, teacher, this proves we've got extra money to waste in our school district. We just cut up a whole bunch of good paper and threw it on the floor. Now we've got to pay the janitor to get the ones we couldn't find. Actually, the peppered moth is proof of design. God's planning ahead. He wants to make sure those moths survive no matter what happens to the background. It's called planning ahead. Did you know that General Motors and Ford, and somebody told me even Honda, will put sometimes an air conditioner and a heater in the same car? Now, wait a minute. Doesn't an air conditioner and a heater do the opposite thing? Why would they put them both in the same car? Well, you see, they're not sure if it's going to warm climate or cold climate. So they make the car adaptable to the different environments. That's planning ahead on the part of the designer. That's not evolution. And the peppered moth is proof of the designer planning ahead. Now look what they tell the kids in this book. Boys and girls, we're going to learn to think critically. Now watch carefully, kids, or you will be tricked. It says, do you think humans are still evolving? What kind of question is that? That's one of those questions like, have you stopped beating your wife yet? Well, if I say yes, I'm admitting I did. If I say no, I'm still doing it. Right? Go back and look at the original question. Do you think humans are still evolving? Doesn't that question assume that evolution happened? What if a kid doesn't believe in evolution at all? How's he supposed to answer that question? This question is not designed to teach the kid how to think. This is designed to teach him what to think. This is a Soviet-style indoctrination type question. And when the kid's all done taking this course, he's going to think he knows how to think. But he doesn't. He knows how to be told what to think. He's been indoctrinated. That's all that's happened. And they're going to say, boys and girls, we've got evidence of evolution from structure. This is called the homology argument. They're going to say, boys and girls, if you look at the forelimbs of the animals, you will see the human has 2 bones in the wrist, and they're called the radius and the ulna. Yep, I knew about that. I broke both of mine a couple times. And boys and girls, guess what? Take a look at the whale. He's got 2 bones in his flipper, and they're called the radius and the ulna. See, that proves we're related. Teacher, who named them? The whale? I doubt it, right? But the textbook says this similar structures in the forelimbs is one of the evidences for evolution. Here's what it says right here. I didn't write this, okay? This is from the book that you and I paid for. It says, boys and girls, comparative anatomy provides further evidence of evolution. The commonality suggests that these and other vertebrate animals are all related. They probably evolved from a common ancestor. Hold on just a minute. This is lie number 10. This does not prove they have a common ancestor. This might prove they have a common designer. You know, maybe the same guy designed them all. That would make them similar, wouldn't it? Did you know the lug nuts from a Chevy will screw onto a Pontiac? That proves they both evolved from a Honda 18 million years ago. No, that proves they both came from the same designers, right? It's not proof for common ancestor. But they're going to say, you know what, boys and girls, many animals have a similar forelimb structure. Good observation. They must have had a common ancestor. Hold it. Bad conclusion. Jump, frog, jump. Then they'll say, see, this helps prove we all came from a rock. Oh, real bad conclusion. Now, this textbook says we've got evidence from development. Now, there aren't too many things about evolution theory that make me any angrier than this. So I will try to stay calm as we discuss this tonight. This is a BSCS biology textbook. By the way, BSCS series is one of the worst there is as far as teaching evolution. It almost always rates the highest in evolution teaching as far as the percentage of text devoted to evolution. And some books are worse than others. We'll get into more of that later. But this one says, the similarity between early stages in the development of many different animals helped convince Darwin that all forms of life shared common ancestors. What's he talking about here? This Merrill Earth Science book says we've got evidence for evolution from embryology. The embryos growing inside the mother. It says it has gills like a fish. Are those little folds of skin gills? I'm sorry, that is lie number 11. Those folds of skin are not gills. Those little folds of skin under the chin later develop into glands in the throat and bones in the ear. It never has anything to do with breathing. Never. I've seen fat folks that have 5 or 6 chins and they cannot breathe through any of them except the top one. Okay? Those are not gill slits. Ernst Haeckel made up this whole thing back in 1869. See, Haeckel read Darwin's book when it came out. The book was published in 1859. Haeckel read it apparently the next year, 1860. As he read this book, he really liked it. He said, wow, Darwin says we will find evidence for the theory. Now, Haeckel taught embryology at the University of Jena in Germany. He knew they were looking for evidence to support the theory. Nobody found any. So 10 years later, Haeckel decided he would help the cause out by making some evidence to support the theory. He took the drawing of a human and a dog embryo, and he changed them. He made his drawings look just alike and said, see, this proves the human and the dog are related. Look how similar the embryos are. He lied, folks. He did this in 1869. On top are Haeckel's drawings. Underneath are actual photographs of those creatures. Now, either Haeckel is a real lousy artist or he's a liar. He made huge charts of his fake drawings and traveled all over Germany, and Haeckel was the man who just about single-handedly converted the Germans to believing in evolution. That logical next step from that teaching was, well, if evolution is true, maybe one race is superior to the rest. And maybe that's the German race. And maybe we ought to go beat everybody up and take over the world. And you won't understand the history of the last 150 years till you tie evolution into it. Haeckel was convicted of fraud at his own university. They had a trial. He was convicted of fraud. Did you know in 1874, it was proven Haeckel was wrong. He was a liar. But guess what? This year at University of West Florida, they are still using Haeckel's drawings as evidence for evolution. Proven wrong 125 years ago. Now, I know it takes a little while for textbooks to get up to date, but I think 125 years is plenty of time, okay? By the way, in Ireland, they're still using this embryology idea as evidence for evolution. They're still using it in Holt biology, used in Escambia County in Santa Rosa County, Florida. They're still using it in Glencoe biology, saying the embryo has gill slits. They're still using it at Troy State University, Alabama, saying the embryo has gill pouches. It's used in every school that I have been to. Bring me your textbooks from your city, and I will show you it's still in there. Because they don't have a replacement. They don't want to take out all these evidences because they don't have any replacement. This one shows a 5 to 6 week embryo, and it says by 7 months, the fetus looks from the outside like a tiny normal baby, but it is not. It's not a baby at 7 months. Excuse me, a whole bunch of kids born at 5.5 months survive. That's a lie, folks. It is human at conception. Don't tell the kids it's not a baby at 7 months. It is human the moment it's conceived. Did you know a lady had surgery on her baby before the baby was born? They cut the mother open, cut the uterus open, and the baby reached out and grabbed the doctor's finger. 5 months along. No, it's human at conception. The angel of the Lord said, behold, thou art with fetus. No, I believe he said you are with child, didn't he? See, it's a child, not a choice. It's a child. So why do they keep this lie in the textbooks anyway? Well, that's the only way to justify abortion. They want the kid to think this is not a human, this is just a fetus, it's just a thing, you know, it's a blob of tissue, it's a problem, it's in the way, we can eliminate this with an abortion. So this stuff is kept in the textbooks to justify abortion. Maybe you heard about Anna Rosa. She was a botched abortion. She had her arm chopped off. She survived the abortion, believe it or not. Everybody says, oh, that's terrible. I agree. But what if they would have cut her head off instead? We never would have heard about her, would we? Hey, it happened today to 4,500 kids in America. Probably some in your town. Now listen, abortion is not the unpardonable sin. I've got some very close, dear friends that have had an abortion. God still loves you. He can still use you. But it is murder. A lot of this Bible is written by folks that were murderers. God can forgive you, and He can still use you in a great way. Moses was a murderer. King David was a murderer. You just don't want to justify it, that's all. Admit, God, I'm sorry, it was wrong. Please forgive me and help me get on with my life. God can still use you in a great way. Don't get discouraged. But don't go around claiming it's okay, because it's not. Now, I live in Pensacola, Florida. You might have heard of my town. We've had several abortion clinics blown up and several doctors shot and killed that were performing abortions. I didn't shoot any doctors and I didn't blow any clinics up. Okay? And I don't think Jesus would do it that way either. He didn't, he lived under Roman control. He didn't go around blowing up tanks and burning down bridges. But the doctors were murderers, plain and simple. When the first doctor got shot, I was preaching down in Fort Lauderdale at Coral Ridge Presbyterian Christian School. And the next day I was flying home. Right in front of me on the airplane were two ladies, two women from NOW, National Organization for Wild Women. They were going to come up to Pensacola and hold a rally and march around town, protesting this doctor getting shot. As we got off the plane, we're walking down the gangway. I noticed they had on their shirt in huge block letters, "Choice above all." So, being my mild-mannered self, I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, what does this mean, choice above all?" She said, "We believe a woman ought to have a right to choose." I said, "Choose what?" She said, "Choose to have an abortion. It's her body, Well, yes, ma'am. If she wants to abort her body, I suppose that's fine. But it looks to me like she's trying to abort somebody else's body. I said, "Ma'am, I'm kind of curious about this. I've got 3 kids, one of each. I delivered one of my kids at home. He's sitting right there. I said, I taught biology and anatomy. I used to raise hamsters. I'm kind of familiar with how this works. I said, would you please tell me why the woman's right to choice stops at birth? I mean, why don't we let the mother choose to kill the baby after it's born? It'd be a lot safer and simpler. Hey, I got an idea. Let's extend abortion rights up until the kid is 2 years old. I know a lot of mothers with a 2-year-old that have thought about it a time or two. We thought about it a lot when my kids were 2. Hey, I got an idea. Let's extend abortion rights up until the kid is 18. I bet they'd behave a lot better. Okay, son, one more time and I'm going to abort you. Teacher, where's Johnny today? Well, he didn't do his homework yesterday, so his mommy aborted him. Hey, grades would skyrocket, wouldn't they? Well, the women did not want to talk about it anymore, so they went and got their luggage, and I got my luggage, and I'm waiting to, have them take me home. I have the taxi cab take me home, and there's a cameraman there. He showed up from Chicago to film the rally. The news media and the textbooks always tries to make the abortion crowd look good. They use positive-sounding words like pro-choice. And they use negative-sounding words for us, like anti-abortion. You ever notice that in the textbooks and in the news media? It's always pro-choice and anti-abortion. How about let's call them pro-death? Well, I got talking to this cameraman, he's going to film the rally. I thought, wait a minute, it's going to make worldwide news. You're going to get 6 people marching around town. You can get 100,000 people to line your streets against abortion, and it won't make the news. Have you noticed that? So I'm talking to the cameraman, and I said, I live right here in Pensacola, and I think there's 2 things wrong with what happened to this doctor. He said, oh yeah, what's wrong with this? I said, well, there should have been a trial first. Nobody should be shot without a fair trial. I said, secondly, the state of Florida should have shot him after the trial. Griffith shouldn't have shot him. If you don't understand my position on abortion, see me later. I'll try to clarify it for you. But they always give them the positive-sounding words. That's one of the reasons I won't take the local newspaper. I'm sorry, I just don't want my money going to support that cause. We get a call at the office once in a while. Hey, would you like to take the Pensacola News Journal? I say, no, ma'am, we don't have a parakeet. You'll figure that one out later. The news media is always slanted to the liberal side. Remember when the kids got shot in Colorado? Right away they jumped on gun control, didn't they? Wait a minute. If kids keep getting shot in our schools, maybe it's time to look at a couple of other issues. You know, maybe the real issue is, should we have public schools? I mean, at least let's discuss it. Maybe the real issue is, should we teach the kids evolution, which says there is no God, which ultimately leads to this kind of behavior? You probably don't know it, but both the boys that did the shooting were strong believers in evolution. They did the shooting on Adolf Hitler's birthday on purpose. They shot Isaiah Shoals just because he was black and Hitler was a racist big time. Eric's t-shirt said, "Natural selection." They shot Cassie just because she believed in God. See, evolution is the opposite of that. And you can't blame guns for what happened at Columbine. Those kids broke 18 gun laws when they went into the school to shoot everybody. Do you think 2 more gun laws would have stopped them? See, blaming guns for Columbine is like blaming spoons for Rosie O'Donnell being fat. Okay? It is not the spoon's fault, okay? And it's not the gun's fault either. You know, maybe the real issue is, should certain criminals be publicly executed? In France, they were dragging this guy to the guillotine to chop his head off one time, and somebody from the crowd shouted, "Do you think this will deter crime?" They said it will for him. It certainly will. You know, maybe the real issue is, all law-abiding citizens should be required to carry guns to protect themselves. Now, I'm saying we should just discuss these things, okay? Suppose every teacher in Columbine High School, just the teachers, suppose the teachers were required to carry a gun. How far down the hallway would those kids have gotten? All any kid has to do is run to the nearest classroom and say, "Teacher, teacher, there's boys out there shooting everybody." "Okay, kids, read page 37. I'll be right back." You say, "That's terrible." Oh, you mean it's better for all the kids to get shot? Think about it. Lenin said, "One man with a gun can control 100 people without one." Imagine you're in a bank waiting to cash a check or get some cash. A guy walks in, pulls out a gun, and says, "Everybody lay on the floor." Everybody lays on the floor, right? He's in control. Now imagine everybody that's a customer at the bank has a weapon hidden. Everybody has a concealed weapon. The guy runs in, "Everybody lay on the floor." You lay on the floor, sir. Now look, I'm in favor of gun control. I really am. Gun control is being able to hold it steady and hit the intended target. That's gun control. Anyway, back to the issue here. The logic they use to justify abortion is absolutely insane. They're going to say it's not human. I'm sorry, that was proven wrong in 1874. They're going to say, well, it's not viable, it can't live on its own. You're not viable either, stark naked on the North Pole, you know. Is the baby viable after it's born? Lay it on the sidewalk for a couple of months. Let's see how it does, right? They're going to say, well, the child might be unwanted. There's kids that are already born that are unwanted. Should we kill all of them? My parents moved 4 times when I was growing up, but I found them every time. They're going to say the child might be a financial burden. Show me a kid that's not. Every kid's a financial burden. They're going to say, well, it may be from rape or incest. Well, then kill the rapist, not the baby. Execute the rapist and adopt out the baby. It's not that complicated, you know. See, in case you don't know how it works, there's 3 people involved here, the mother, the father, and the baby. If we have to kill one, why is it always the baby? Why don't we abort the mother once in a while? One doctor got kind of upset with me, and he said, "Dr. Hovind, do you think if a woman is raped and gets pregnant, she should be required to carry the baby?" I said, "Sir, that's a horrible thought. But suppose it happens. And suppose she does carry the baby. And she has her baby. 5 years later, she is holding her 5-year-old, and she's trying to cook supper. And her mind flashes back to the horrible experience she had, and she loses control just for a few minutes and kills her 5-year-old. Is it murder?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Oh, okay. Suppose she would have killed it 5 months after it was born. Would that be murder?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, suppose she would have killed it 5 minutes after it was born. Would that be murder?" He could see where I was going. I said, "Let me help you out, sir." "Yes." What if she would have killed it 5 minutes before it was born? Like the DNC, or the DNX abortion that Clinton and Gore voted for. It's still murder, folks. Still murder. And to me, abortion is a major issue. I won't vote for any candidate if I think he supports abortion. I'd rather have Mickey Mouse in there than a candidate that supports abortion. Hey, if you really want pro-choice, let's really have choice in Florida. Is it against the law in your county to shoot deer at night with spotlights? You have to give them a sporting chance, right? We're going to pass a law in Florida that says if a woman goes for an abortion, the nurse will have a jar of marbles, and we're going to give the kid a sporting chance. We're going to have a lottery, okay? One marble in the jar will say baby, one will say mother, and one will say father. Let's put one more in there for doctor and another one in there for governor. And we're going to draw a marble to see who gets killed. Let's put a whole bunch in there for president, and let's make it, a good lottery here. So we're going to have a lottery. Hey, how many folks would have an abortion then? Hey, did you know that everybody that ever voted for abortion has already been born? Think about that one. They're going to say, well, abortion is legal. That doesn't mean it's right. In 1936, the German Supreme Court declared Jews are not persons. And with that decision, it cleared the way for Hitler to begin slaughtering the Jews. They began rounding up the Jews and torturing them and killing them. I've been to Germany 3 times. I read lots of books about Hitler and the Holocaust just to keep my blood boiling. What he did was because of his belief in evolution. That's why he killed the Jews, folks. Hitler believed the German race was the superior race and they deserved to rule the world. The German Führer has consistently sought to make the practice of Germany conform to the theory of evolution. Did you know Hitler offered to send the Jews to anybody who would take them? Roosevelt refused to allow the Jews to come to America in 1938. Hitler said, I'll send them to you on luxury ships. America wouldn't take them. In Hitler's book, which was ghost-written for him, 1924, Hitler said, no more than nature desires the mating of weaker with stronger individuals, even less does she desire the blending of a higher with a lower race. Adolf, who is a higher race? In his book, he continually talks about Aryan blood, the superior race and the lower peoples. Who's the lower people, Adolf? Well, I happened to find Hitler's hit list one day as I was researching on Hitler. Hitler thought the Nordics, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norwegians, were close to pure Aryan, the superior race. Did you catch all that? Blonde hair, blue-eyed Norwegian. Vorden står det till idag. Ja, sure, you betcha. Oofda. He thought they were the superior race. He thought the Germans were mostly Aryan. He said the Mediterraneans are slightly Aryan. The Slavics are half Aryan, half ape. The Orientals are slightly ape. The black Africans are predominantly ape. And the Jews are close to pure ape. There's the list he was going on, folks. That's why he hated the Jews, because of his belief in evolution. He really thought he was doing the world a favor by eliminating the inferiors. By the way, he also hated the blacks. Does anybody know where the Olympics was held in 1936? Berlin, Germany. Does anybody know who won the most gold medals? Jesse Owens, the black American athlete. Hitler was so angry he walked out of the stadium and said, "It is unfair to make my men race against this animal." My Bible says all nations are of one blood. And if you will send money to a missionary to go across the ocean and win a black man to Christ, and you won't go across the street to win a black man to Christ and let him come to your church, you are a hypocrite. And I know I'm standing in the South, but you're still a hypocrite, okay? We're all of one blood, folks. A couple of years ago when I was in Germany, I went into the courtroom at Nuremberg where they held the trial. Do you know, during the trial, when those criminals were being tried for what they did, the war crimes, they said, "We did nothing illegal, we were just obeying orders." It's exactly correct. But guess what? They were found guilty anyway, weren't they? And even though abortion is perfectly legal in America, somebody's going to be found guilty of murder someday at God's trial. Don't justify it. 1973, our Supreme Court said the word person does not include the unborn. And with that decision right there, it sealed the fate now of 38 million kids who've died by abortion. That's the whole population of California. Did you know 1,000 million, that's 1 billion kids have died worldwide? They say the average woman now has 1 abortion in her lifetime. 1 per person. 1/6 of the world's population has already been killed just by abortion. Hey, if he's not alive, why is he growing? If he's not a human being, what kind of being is he anyway? And here these doctors get paid to commit these abortions. My Bible says, "Cursed be he that taketh reward to slay an innocent person." And all the people shall say, Amen. The Bible says God hates hands that shed innocent blood. It's murder, folks. Margaret Sanger started a group called Planned Parenthood back in 1916. Her goal was to eliminate the inferior races. She thought the blacks, the Orientals, and the Jews were human weeds. She wanted to eliminate them. Their motto was, "No gods and no masters." They wanted to use birth control to create a race of thoroughbreds. One of Hitler's doctors wrote an article for her magazine. You know, Hitler referred to the Jews as a parasite in the body of nations. Interesting. The abortionists today refer to the unborn child as a parasite in the woman's body. Margaret Sanger said, "We don't want the word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population." Wow, interesting. Today they have a Negro president, Faye Waddleton. But the goal has not changed, surprisingly. They're still racist. In 1952, this document was published, "How to Plan Your Children. Your questions answered." What is birth control? Look what they say here. Is it an abortion? Definitely not. An abortion requires an operation. It kills the life of a baby after it has begun. It is dangerous to your life and health. It may make you sterile. Boy, they've changed their tune in 40 years, haven't they? Now, $300 million goes to support abortion. And by the way, United Way is one of Planned Parenthood's supporters. And I remember every couple of months they'd come around at the job when I worked at General Motors and say, "You know, we want to have 100% compliance in United Way. Would you like to give 2 hours of your paycheck?" I said, "No." They said, "Then we can't have 100% compliance." I said, "Good. I wish you had 0% compliance." Now, United Way probably does some good things, but I cannot support an organization that supports killing kids. And if you do, I think you need to check your relationship with God. Something is a little shaky someplace, okay? This textbook says, you have an appendix that is vestigial. You don't need it anymore. I'm sorry, folks. You do need your appendix, okay? This is lie number 13. There are no vestigial organs. The appendix is part of your immune system. If your appendix is taken out, it will shorten your life, probably because you'll have a higher susceptibility for leukemia, Hodgkin's disease, cancer of the colon, cancer of the ovaries. Now, it is true you can live without your appendix, okay? You can live without both your legs and both your arms also. That doesn't prove you don't need it. There aren't any vestigial organs. And even if there were, that's the opposite of evolution. That's losing, not gaining. Is that how evolution works? You lose everything until you have it all? Oh, I don't get it. This textbook says the whale has a vestigial pelvis. That's not a vestigial pelvis. This book for little bitty kids says, just imagine whales walking around. It's true. What are they talking about here? They're talking about those little bitty bones right there on the whale. Yep, I can see them walking around, can't you? That's not a vestigial pelvis. This guy says the same thing. The whale's pelvis is evidence of its evolution from four-legged land-dwelling mammals. I'm sorry, folks. That is not a vestigial pelvis. That is a lie. Those bones are necessary for muscles to attach to so that the whale can reproduce. It has nothing to do with walking on land. It has to do with getting more baby whales. That's not a vestigial pelvis. This one says, humans have a tailbone that is of no apparent use. I was in North Alabama debating against the president of the North Alabama Atheist Association, or something like that. I forget his title. He got up and he said, now folks, we have evidence for evolution. Humans have a tailbone they no longer need. When it was my turn, I got up and I said, Mr. Patterson, I taught biology and anatomy. I happen to know there are 9 little muscles that attach to the tailbone, without which you cannot perform some very valuable functions. I will not tell you what they all are, but trust me, you need those muscles. I said, now, if you think the tailbone is vestigial, I, Kent Hovind, will pay right now to have yours removed. Bend over. Folks, that is a lie. That is not. There are no vestigial tailbones. That simply is baloney. This textbook says the coccyx, that's the tailbone, is a small bone at the end of the human vertebral column. It has no present function and is the remainder of bones that once occupied the long tail of a tree-living ancestor. They told me when I went to school, man used to have a tail, but he lost it because he didn't need it. I thought, didn't need it? Have you ever thought how handy a tail would be? Have you ever come to the door with 2 sacks of groceries? Wouldn't that be nice to be able to open that door and walk right in there? Lost it because we didn't need it. It'd be tougher to put your britches on. I understand that, you know. Somebody could figure that out. But that simply is baloney. It's not true. You know, Satan is using this evolution theory to lead folks to hell. Destroy kids' faith in the Bible. Make sure they never get saved. If they do get saved, make sure they never are effective for the Lord. We'll take a little break. When we come back for the next session, we're going to talk about more lies in the textbooks and show you some things you can do about it to fix it in your area. When we come back, more lies in the textbooks. Thank you for joining us.